Welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Abigail Pogrebin. Since the horrific massacre of Israelis on October 7th, 2023, many American campuses have seen heightened public anti-Semitism, including physical threats against Jews, a celebration of the Hamas slaughter, calls for the end of Israel, and statements declaring Israel responsible for October 7th. To give us a firsthand look at what it actually feels like to lead Jewish students right now in this very difficult time, I asked three of my favorite Hillel directors, one at Northwestern, one at Queens College, and one at Yale, to join me for this conversation today. Uri Cohen, since 2018, has served as executive director of the Slifka Center at Yale, which nurtures Jewish life by cultivating cultural, spiritual, religious, and intellectual experiences that enrich the lives of Yale students. As director, Uri has overseen a significant increase in student engagement with Jewish life on campus and serves as a resource to the Yale administration and the community more broadly in its efforts to educate about anti-Semitism and to proactively increase Jewish belonging at Yale. Prior to coming to Yale, Uri served as executive director of Queens College Hillel, and while director, Queens College Hillel won Hillel International's Outstanding Campus Award. Michael Simon is executive director of the Fiedler Hillel at Northwestern University. He works with students, staff, colleagues, and community members to inspire Jewish students at Northwestern to make a meaningful and enduring commitment to Jewish life. Before coming to NU in 2010, Michael served for 7 years as associate director of Harvard Hillel. He is part of AJC Chicago's BDS task force and has served on the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs Jewish Muslim Community Building Initiative Advisory Board. In 2013, he received the Rock Award from Northwestern University in recognition of his outstanding leadership at Hillel and his work towards strengthening the entire campus community. The following year, he was named a Richard Joel Exemplar of Excellence by Hillel International. And finally, last but not least, is Jenna Citron Schwab. Jenna became the first director of Jewish student life at Queens Hillel, and after quadrupling student engagement and being awarded Hillel International's Outstanding Campus Award, she became Queens Hillel's assistant director in 2016, and in 2019 became its executive director. Jenna is a member of the second cohort of the Ruskay Institute for Jewish Professional Leadership, and she received Hillel International's Richard Joel Exemplar of Excellence Award in 2018. Jenna serves on Hillel International's Directors Cabinet. She's on the advisory board of the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, and for her commitment to the Queens Jewish community, Jenna was awarded a Citation of Honor by the Queensborough president in 2023. This is a lauded bunch of Hillel directors. Welcome, Michael, Uri, and Jenna. I so appreciate you being here, especially when I know what is on your plates every day, all day now, probably more than you expected in your job description when you signed up for these roles. Michael, I would like to start with you, our Northwestern representative, but you've been in the collegiate world for decades, I want to say, without dating you.
Well, that's
two
more
decades.
Than a decade, so sure.
So can you just give a sense of if what you're seeing now feels different? We have talked about anti-Semitism before. We have talked about a climate that feels inhospitable to Jews in the past, but it feels like there's something that has turned that is uglier and more laid bare. And those of us who are sometimes accused of hyperbole would love you to put it in perspective.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here with you, Abigail, and with my esteemed colleagues. Going to the framing a moment ago when you talked about, is this in our job description? I mean, first of all, it feels, I think, when you work in the Hillel world, kind of everything is in the job description. And I mean, 20 years ago when I started, this was just in terms of Israel, there was the second Intifada still going. We were in the Iraq war. I mean, the world, we're just post 9/11. The world has seen intense moments, kind of at every point. It does, I will say, feel a little bit different, maybe even a lot different, and my colleagues will talk about it in just, first of all, the scope. What has happened most years, we'll have a flare up on campus related to the Israel-Palestinian conflict or a flare-up of like something anti-Semitic, and then it'll be on one campus or a couple of campuses, and then it kind of, we go on. And right now it feels like it's not that things are happening on every campus all the time, but they're happening on multiple campuses. Students are aware, even if it's not happening on my campus, it's happening on my friend's campus, and it's making me feel like something is shifting. And also, let's not forget, we're in the middle of a horrific conflict that is, it feels like at best, we're just in the middle of it and it's ongoing. So the outside news is very much impacting the day-to-day reality on the ground on campus.
And can I just ask you personally, did you feel like there has even been time for you to help your students, your Jewish students, process October 7th and the massacres that took place? Or was it almost instantaneous that they had to field these accusations that Israel kind of had it coming in some sense?
It felt like we had a couple of days where, and this feels to me like on the micro at Northwestern, and I'd love to hear from my colleagues how it was for them. And also in the macro of the Jewish world, there was the moment where we were just hugging each other together and, metaphorically, and saying, we need to all come together. A few friends and allies came together to, just be in community, and also to try to, it wasn't even processing, just try to comprehend the magnitude of what had happened. And very quickly, the narrative began to shift, and we knew it would shift, but it happened really quickly. And I think part of the challenge for us, and even, is that there is unprocessed trauma that we're still living through now. And so we're trying to manage that and engage students and our community in that, while also dealing with a landscape on campus, a landscape in social media that is incredibly challenging.
Jenna, can I ask you to pick up in terms of right after the October 7th events and just how shocking and horrific and frightening they were? Was there a sense that you had of kind of knowing, whether it was programming or just gathering, or you name your tools, that when you have kind of no preparation for something like that, what did you actually do first?
The first thing that we did was check in on students. We're a commuter campus. We don't see our students in a residential way, right? They're not on campus morning to night in the same way that you might see at a large school or a private. So we were texting and checking in. How is your family? How's your brothers? How's your sisters? How are they doing on the other campuses all over the country? That was really our first step. I'm not sure that we had a sense of what we needed to do next, but I'm actually very lucky that I have a social worker on my team. I have said this more times in the last 2 years than I ever expected to say when we hired her. She explained to the team that grief is a process and that we had to take it slow. And that really helped us sort of slow it down for ourselves. It's because we're people too, right? We were in immense pain, and slow it down for our students to say, I know you want to act. I know you want to get on campus. But right now we're actually going to talk through this first, and then we're going to move to action. That was so hard. So hard.
In terms of the social media kind of deluge that I think all of us, but particularly students, were victims of. I say victims because it's just overwhelming, and I think very hard to process some of the ugliness that, again, was kind of coming at Jews generally, whether or not someone had any connection to Israel, assumptions about culpability, guilt, and a certain kind of this is, you're responsible in some way. There was that messaging was fairly fast. How were your students dealing with it, and how are you as their the person they turn to, I'm sure, telling them to respond?
Yeah, we in many ways we've begged them to stay off social media. That's been one of our main guiding principles was you've got to get off social media. You've got to turn off Instagram. You've got to turn off TikTok. We won't give them advice that they have to fight internet battles in the same way we don't give them advice they need to fight campus battles. Mm-hmm. That's not the place. Yeah, we've been encouraging them to replace social media time with friend time, with community time. At the end of the day, that's actually what they're telling us they want. So now we're trying to help them match what they're saying that they want with the actions that they're actually doing. If you say you want community, be with us, put down your phone. It's okay to read the news, right? It's okay to check your Instagram a few times a day, but you can't doom scroll because you have to pass your classes, because you're here in college to get a job, right? Because you're going to work because you've got to help your family. They're listening sometimes, but not most of
It's
them.
hard. I need that advice myself.
Right?
Uri, can you tell us again? You're at Yale. What was, again, in those first days, how your job changed?
Thanks, Abby, and thanks everyone. The job changed very, very quickly from being a Jewish life. Lifting up Jewish life as a part of a functioning campus community to being just a place of grief, and also trying to sort out all of the emotions, because there were a lot of students who were feeling grief, and there were students who were starting to feel angry, and they were trying to figure out what to do when and in which order. And one of the clearest things that I felt that our staff really tried to promote over those first few days was, this is a time for grief and sadness. Let's do that first, and we can put aside the anger and the what next and all that other stuff that's going to end up being divisive. Let's focus on the thing we all have in common, which is grief. And that's really, I think, what led to, a huge vigil that we did in the center of the Yale campus, with 400 people linking arms around each other and singing and staying for an extra half hour past the program, because we were able to tap into the need for the grief, knowing that exactly what the script was going to be in the days and weeks to come, not knowing exactly what was going to happen when, but knowing pretty much what was going to come. There would be plenty of time for anger. There would be plenty of time for advocacy. There would be plenty of time for all that. But that the grief needed to be front and center. And that human experience was the most powerful element in our relationship with the university also. Because they needed to understand that sense of grief, which they understood kind of, but not fully. This is not a war that's happening over there. I mean, it is a war that's happening over there, but with our family and our friends. And then it evolved, as we all knew that it would, into a sense of fear for us right now, right here where we are. So it was important to have sort of an emotional clarity to start.
Can you, I want to pick up on that word fear, because I feel like that is part of what's new here, is the visceral sense of the stakes being quite high in terms of student safety in a way that does not feel hyperbolic. Especially we've seen what we've seen with kids having to barricade themselves with threatening whatever tweets, or I don't know, what was that on some kind of Slack channel or something at Cornell, where a student said he would bring an assault rifle to campus and shoot all you pig Jews. I'm not going to give the litany here because you've all followed it. But it's not only getting unleashed, but it doesn't necessarily feel like there is an instantaneous clamping down on this kind of rhetoric. So I guess, Uri, how much, I guess, are you kind of legitimizing physical, actual fear right now? Or do you think that is an exaggeration for students?
I don't think it's an exaggerated fear, but I also don't think that it's actually present in most cases, but nobody knows where the exception is. I think people are very concerned for their safety. I think Jews are walking around, kind of looking around the corner and keeping their eyes open to each side. The Palestinian students on our campus are doing the same, and Muslim students are doing the same. So it's not just the Jews who are feeling very vulnerable and unsafe right now. It's kind of interesting. I was talking with our imam the other day, and he and I both agreed that the fear that the Jews are feeling is not that we're going to be attacked by Palestinians or Muslims. And he agreed that the Muslim community didn't feel like they were about to be attacked by Jews, but there is a sense that there's this mob out there. There's a mob mentality. There's an actual physical mob, which is gathered on campus, perhaps not as a mob, but in the form of a rally, that creates a sense of fear, creates a sense of danger that students feel, that parents feel. I've had numbers of parents calling and saying, should I pull my child out? Is it just not safe for them to be here? And the most calming things that I've been able to say to students and parents alike is that I'm in touch with public safety and the Yale police every day, multiple times a day, and things are as good as I could possibly imagine, which is an amazing thing to be able to tell people. But it gives people an enormous amount of calm and ability to like move into the other stuff once they know that everybody is physically safe. So,
and before I move on to your colleagues, so Uri, I just want to, you sort of painted a picture where the Muslims are not necessarily fearing Jews and the Jews not fearing Muslims. And I'm so reassured to hear that, but it's not necessarily what we're absorbing from the outside. And when we see a statement from Yale's for Palestine that affirms support for or blames the Israeli Zionist regime, that's a quote, for the violence, how does one not conflate a certain amount of threat, maybe not physical threat, but there is an oversimplification of putting Muslim students into a Yale's for Palestine statement that basically affirms that what Hamas did was some kind of liberation exercise.
The Muslim community, in my experience, talks a lot about being dehumanized in this moment, feeling like they're not heard, feeling like they're being used, feeling like they're being ignored in this moment. And I think what you're describing, Abby, fits right into that. People are all caught up in the liberation movement because it's a way to be involved in something that feels like it's just, even without getting to know the details of it or getting to understand what the history is like. And so that's why I say it's not primarily the Muslims and the Palestinians that our students are afraid of. We're afraid of what the actions of the people who are trying to make this cause, which is not theirs. Now, there are some of our colleagues who actually do have Muslim students who are the main organizers, and so the dynamics are perhaps different in those cases, but perhaps aren't. But there's this way, and we see this all around the world. The fact that there's so many anti-Israel protests in countries that don't ever think or talk about any of this. It captures the imagination in a way that's really powerful. And I think that's what we're seeing most students being afraid of, that's going to come here, and I'm going to be the next one that gets cornered in a library.
Michael, the Northwestern had an incident where the daily Northwestern newspaper was, I guess, commandeered by a group. I don't know what's the right word for it, but basically they put out a fraudulent paper with anti-Semitic, anti-Israel messages. Can you just address again, when students see that, how is one supposed to process where that's coming from, who that's coming from, how pervasive it is?
Right. Yeah. So just for folks who don't know what happened, the Daily Northwestern, which is now not daily, it's actually twice a week printed, last Wednesday on a day that it wouldn't normally show up. There were fake covers, but with the commandeered, as you said, masthead that made it look like it was a real paper that just had very, I would say, intense kind of anti-Zionist and even a little clearly anti-Semitic language. There was a little fake ad for Birthright Israel, talking about one man's home is another man's former home, that kind of a thing. And that was plastered.
And I see there was a headline, Northwestern is complicit in the genocide of Palestinians.
In the genocide of Palestinians. And it actually had a picture of the hospital, a press conference after the hospital bombing in Gaza, which has been very widely disputed, but it said, an Israeli. I would say for a lot of people, it felt very inflammatory. For a lot of students, it was not just the content, but it was just that it was all over campus. And it was also all over campus on a day when, and Jenna and Uri maybe on your campus as well, had been called by Students for Justice in Palestine as a national walkout day where students would walk out and rally. And we knew there would be a rally, and there ended up being a rally. But here, Abby, I do want to go back, and we've talked before. I often look at like campus climate as how do we distinguish between things that are challenging, free speech, even hate speech, which can be highly challenging, and things that are actually threatening. And I think for me in this instance, and in the last couple of years, but particularly now, the gap between what's challenging and what's threatening has been narrowing, and the gap between the perception and the reality is narrowing. And the challenge for us, so Uri said he's had parents asking, should I pull my child out, my student, should I have them stay home? We haven't had that. We have had, is it safe for a student to come to the Hillel building? That's heartbreaking. Or is it safe for them, maybe to be walking at night? Should they be taking, okay. But what is, I think, really important in this moment is everyone's aware of what's happening everywhere else. We haven't had, thank God, the anonymous threat like they had at Cornell, and they've since found out, who it was. But our students are very aware that happened at Cornell. And the question is, are we like one step behind that? And this brings in the question of, well, what is the university? The university here, back to the fake Daily Northwesterns, they said, this happened on campus and was felt offensive to some members of the community. Well, that's true. And we would have also liked the university to say, and when something offensive happens for members of our community, we're not going to tolerate it. And here's what we mean when we say we don't tolerate it. And that step is one that we're pushing for and hoping to hear more kind of concrete efforts that can be taken.
Talking about those concrete efforts, Jenna, the governor of New York, Governor Hochul, is apparently saying that there is going to be an independent review of anti-Semitism policies in the CUNY system. Can you just address why that's happening, whether you support that, where that comes from?
Yeah, I want to start by saying that I welcome that investigation. There have been a lot of serious challenges at CUNY campuses. There's 25 of them. That's something to remember. It's one of the largest employers in the state of New York, 500,000.
You're not responsible for all of them, right, for all Jews.
Thankfully. But, one, and the largest Jewish community at a CUNY. And the concerns about CUNY campuses are real. I would never want to downplay that. At the same time, the chancellor has been fantastic over the last 3 weeks. He was one of the first to step up and sign onto a statement. I think Yeshiva University put it out initially condemning Hamas. He has called, he has texted, he's checked in. I was with him just 2 days ago. He knows our campus. He knows us really well. He was our president for many years.
What's his name?
Chancellor Matos Rodriguez.
And so you're feeling like he's paying attention and kind of meeting you where you are. You're not feeling like there hasn't been a response.
Yes, and I think the and side here is the question I think we're all asking around is who's going to hold universities accountable to their own policies? I'm not a lawyer. I can't talk about law. I don't know anything about free speech. What I know is what campus feels like right now. And how is it possible that a student group can repost and paraphrase the Hamas charter with no consequences? How is it possible that despite us following every rule under the sun, to reserve space on a quad for a beautiful rally, to ensure that we have public safety there and go through the hundreds of steps to get to that, but anyone can just show up apparently in the middle of a quad and hold a rally, no questions asked, and nobody gets in trouble for it? It's not possible. Students cheat on tests, there's consequences. Why are there no consequences for how they're engaging in social media, for the words that they're using in the classroom or in the hallways? So I say I welcome the investigation because I think that the policies are there, but the procedures are just not tight enough. And we really need that right now. All students need to know that somebody's caring for them. And one of the ways that we care for them is through policy. So I welcome it.
And Uri, again, I'm not asking you to name names here, but just generally, you can imagine that those of us watching from the outside are asking kind of whose hand is on the tiller here? Why does it feel like the boat can be taken in any direction by whoever, again, to Jenna's point, wants to show up with some flags and some chants that are actually destabilizing, I think, the learning in many cases. And I'm going to sound like an old fogey, but I don't understand why they're just, a university is not the entire country. It is an enclosed space that has controls for a reason, to create a kind of atmosphere where learning is paramount. And yes, there's respect for views, but this feels like a kind of the war is being allowed to be taken to the campus without it being clear who's running the show. Am I overstating that? And you can tell that I'm a little bit dismayed, but I think I'm representing a lot of people who kind of just wonder why it doesn't feel like someone is taking control here. Uri.
Yeah. You're not overstating it, but you're also, and couldn't be expected,
oversimplifying it.
Well, right. I mean, people on the outside couldn't necessarily be expected to understand the inner workings and why things are the way they are. I can't explain exactly why things are the way they are, but I do have some insight. This is the space that I've been occupying for the last few weeks. Universities have mottos. Like Yale's is Lux et Veritas, Urim v'Tumim, light and truth. So they have these great aspirational things, which one would hope would be more than a marketing ploy.
It's a great Hebrew motto,
right? Yeah. Right. The original Hebrew on the crest, and so we would hope that these are not just marketing ploys, that they actually mean something about the aspiration of the university. So that's on the one hand. On the other hand, the universities are restricted and bound by substantial legal or quasi-legal, principles or documents or whatever it is. I'm also not a lawyer, but I do understand the concept of there are immovables and there are movables, and there are a lot of immovables that we could spend all our time trying to like push a boulder up a hill, but it won't work because it's just basically immovable. And so, if the university is bounded by unmovables on one end and aspiration on the other, how are they going to navigate this moment? What I would like them to do is to say, we're not going to touch the immovables, but we're going to aspire to be really great. And we're going to aspire to what it means to be really human. So,
and I just want to make sure, so we're not getting too, not esoteric, but I don't think everyone's going to understand what an immovable is. Is that something like a free speech?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Exactly. Right. Free speech is the perfect example. Okay. They're not going to trample on free speech. They're going to protect things that I don't like. And they I think that's part of the definition of free speech is that, free speech needs to be protected, especially the speech I don't like. Because as soon as somebody else's free speech is weakened, then my own free speech is weakened. And I need that free speech for my own livelihood, for my own ability to survive in this country. So they're going to do that. They have to do that. And there are also consequences to that speech. Free speech doesn't mean harmless speech. So how can a university both protect that speech, which they decide should be protected, and also attend to the harms that come from that speech? And how can they also say, we have values, lux et veritas, right? Light and truth. These things that were said that we are protecting because it's free speech do not line up with our values. And here's why. I would love for them to be able to do that. The truth of the matter is their ability to do that is much, much lower than any of us would like. I think even in the best case, and I'm really grateful for the partnership that we have with the Yale administration. It's extraordinary in a lot of ways. The intent is there in a lot of ways, and especially in public safety and certain other areas, they've really come through like knights in shining armor. And yet the ability to be there for communities that are hurting, that are being harmed by free speech and are being rocked by the fact that, as Jenna said, anybody can come in and take over the quad is inadequate and far too slow. It's just not acceptable. Students are feeling in pain and they're feeling vulnerable and they're feeling unsafe and they're feeling uncared for. I want to come back to what Jenna just said about students wanting to feel like the university cares about them, like somebody cares about them, and the university can't even do that. So how can the university even try to aspire to what's best of what human beings are best able to be when they can't be there for their own people in times of crisis? And so that feeling, Abby, that you described, that there's nobody with their hands on the wheel, is because there's nobody with their hands on the wheel that can do all of these parts. And I think that's really where our Hillel, and I'm sure is the case for the other Hillels, we're really stepping into that gap. Because
so Michael, I want to go to you and that's really helpful, everything that you've all said. I want to get to a little bit more into what is so hard right now for students. And I think from what I've read, and I've kind of taken that deep dive, especially before I interviewed the three of you, is that just that threshold condemnation of one of the most horrific events imaginable, and particularly for the Jewish people, was not only glided over, but is suddenly conflated with some kind of resistance that is honorable. It is so hard then to have the conversation that absolutely many Jews were engaged in of the rights of Palestinians, a two-state path, a sense of human rights and the humanitarian reality in Gaza. Like that conversation, which a lot of Jews have cared about, is suddenly, it's not thrown into question. It's just that, is it really so hard to first just say how horrified you are and how you disavow the fact that essentially my family, both literal and metaphorical, was burned alive? Is that a hard idea for you to start with, or even acknowledge, if it's not the first place you start? That's what I think is so, it's kind of a stopping place that is both shocking and very hard to get past in terms of this kind of interfaith understanding. Let's all have a conversation now.
I mean, I think there's a lot here to unpack. I'm going to try and see where we get. I mean, first of all, and this also ties in with.
I would just say you've always been one of my rabbis, even though
I do not.
You don't play well.
It's a very affordable smicha. I don't even have ordination. I mean, I think some of what Uri and Jenna are talking about in terms of the university response and things where their limits are, it's not an equal playing field in kind of in both directions. And just bear with me for one moment. You know, the rallies, the anti-Israel, I don't even want to call it pro-Palestinian in this case. I mean, SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, have a very narrow activist. I mean, they have a very long list of demands, but it's a very narrow activist way of approaching, but it's very attractive. And it also is very much about making it either or. So even the students who will acknowledge, and I think, Abby, you're right. I mean, there's tremendous pain in our community when it's not even acknowledged at all, with the statements of all of the violence you're seeing from October 7th, and everything before and everything after is all the fault of Israel. It's, I mean, it is such absurd, and also just like it's like poisonous. People who follow that's very bad. But there's also the yes, it was terrible, but that word, but I've been thinking and talking about this a lot lately with colleagues and with students. If we were, and I'm not an improv guy, but if we were able actually to do yes and, it would, and I think it could, and I think it must change the trajectory, at least for people who are not way at the extreme and unwilling. If you're able to say, yes, there was a horrific terror attack against Israel by Hamas, and let's just sit with that for a moment. And I want to talk to you about other causes or narrative or pain of suffering for Palestinians. I'll just speak for me personally, and I had this conversation with a colleague yesterday. It was painful, but I can have that yes and I have a responsibility. And I mean, we have a responsibility to our students to be able to say, yes, if you believe, as I do, Israel was attacked here, this would not at all be happening. This conversation wouldn't be happening today if it were not for Hamas. And Palestinians are suffering. We can argue about the causes of why and how, but it is a humanitarian crisis and a disaster for real people, real families. And we need to talk about what kind of responsibility, where does the responsibility lie? It lies with Hamas. And we all have to figure out how to live together. How are we going to live together? How are they going to live together? Help that. And then here, we're on a campus. Like, what are we doing here? And I think that's also the challenge, because a lot of folks are on.
What do you mean? What are we doing here?
I mean, back to you with your old fogey comment earlier. And I'm only quoting you. I'm not, God forbid, calling you an
Don't quote me exactly.
But I'm with you, Abby. And I think, like, this is the marketplace of ideas. This is the place where young people come to learn from difference, to try to figure out what it means, in our case, what it means to be Jewish and what it means to be human in a really complicated, challenging world where a lot of people are going to disagree strongly with me. But if we can't come on, I reject the language that there's a war on campus. And that it is a battlefield. That is not what the campus is supposed to be. It is supposed to be a gathering place, a place where we're aspirational to trying to find what it means to be a better citizen, a better human. And yeah, we're going to have challenges and fights. And right now it is a very, very tense environment. And I don't want to shy away from the fights, but I also think we should think about the language and not that we're saying it here, but we're seeing it all around. And what is the language that is going to help us meet this moment without losing sight of what is the moment tomorrow, next month, next year, because we're in this, it's a marathon, and we need to be not only here for our students and leading the moment, but we need to help lead the way for what the next step looks like.
I get that. I guess I think what I'm getting from you, maybe in sort of kind of soft counseling here, is that the idea that there are red lines, or that I'm looking for a kind of threshold acknowledgement in order to have the next conversation, is kind of a naive posture. And in a sense, I'm denying sort of the reality of what it means to be 18, 19, 20 on campus right now, which is that you can't ask for a certain kind of, like, before you get in the door of this conversation, I need you to acknowledge X, because they have their own gatekeeping threshold statement that they want from me. Is that what you're getting at?
I don't think it's, I think, look, another thing I want to add, and I know Jenna and Uri will agree, like, there's all of these things that are painful for our students, and there's real questions about security and safety. What I've been hearing, like, most from students is, I can't believe that my friend, my roommate, the person I'm in a band with, the person I'm in a team with, they're liking this post that is basically justifying what Hamas did. They're liking, they're showing solidarity in a way that they've never talked about before, in a way that really makes me feel they don't understand. They don't even see the pain. And I think I'm with you. I think it is not saying, well, we just need to, like, let them be. I don't think you can be in a really engaged conversation about what is happening if you don't acknowledge that there was a horrific, brutal terrorist attack against Jews that was caused by Hamas and was not provoked. But I think I did a but. And I think there's a way to get into that conversation. It's not happening on social media. It's not going to be in rallies. I have a student who's gone and found people and said, I want to sit down and talk to you. And some people won't, but he's had 5 conversations. He hasn't necessarily changed minds, but he's like, I want you to know why what you liked or what you posted, friends of his, hurt me. And we have a conversation. And if they're willing to have that conversation, I think there's an opening for some step forward. And otherwise, we're going to be just in a lot of pain and suffering and fear.
Thank you. Jenna, you had mentioned when we did a sort of pre-conversation about how the interfaith work has to continue. Can you just talk about a little bit about what that work was pre-October 7th and how you see kind of the road to it enduring?
Absolutely. I'm reminded of a moment 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I'm not really sure, where we had a really challenging experience with Muslim and Jewish students. We at Queens, we share a hallway. We don't have our own building. We're in a student union. You get off the elevator, you walk through a main space. To your right is Hillel, and directly across is the Muslim Student Association. We live in shared community, and it's beautiful, and it's absolutely—
And it's literal.
It's literal. And it's always been challenging. Not like now, but it's always been challenging. About 7 years ago, we were supposed to do a movie or something. I think it was a movie or a book with the Muslim Student Association, and their peers from another campus got on social media and said that they couldn't do that. Would be bad for the Muslim community to do this movie event with Jews. And there was a lot of confusion. I remember the president of Queens College put all the students into a room. Myself and Uri, I believe you were there as well, and the imam of the MSA at the time. And we were having this huge conversation. And finally, at some point, someone said to the Muslim students, "Do you know what the word Zionism means?" And immediately saw students sort of like sit back, like they didn't want to say that they didn't actually know what it meant. And the imam said something that stayed with me forever. He said, "Do you know how we turn 5 times a day and pray towards Mecca? Your friends across the table turn 3 times a day and pray towards Jerusalem. And that's what you as religious students need to understand about Zionism." And you saw the whole room change. They had never taken the moment just to say, what does Zionism mean to you? Yesterday, we had a similar situation. I work really closely with the Muslim Student Association. Our interfaith work is core to what we do. And we were talking about their— they had sort of co-hosted an event on the quad. And I asked the president, have you ever asked any of your Jewish peers what from the river to the sea means to us? Same feeling, sat back, he saw this, and he hadn't. And I think there's a lot of different starting places in these conversations, but some of it actually just has to go way back to language, to the simple things. What were you too afraid to ask? Because no one's ever given you the opportunity. The other part of it is to allow students to say, I don't know. No one's letting students say, I don't know in this moment, and telling them it's okay to say, I don't know. So in the interfaith work that we're doing right now, we do a lot of fellowships, really deep, like learn how to have small group conversations, learn how to ask the hard questions, but we're actually going back to the basics now. What does it mean to be in community? What makes you feel safe? What does family mean to you? And I know that those things, they seem sort of fluffy, but fluffy is actually really important. Fluffy is the heart. And that's what you need to really get past the tough stuff.
And what you touched on kind of narrative and spaces or pockets of ignorance on both sides. There's plenty. It seems to me now that those pockets of ignorance are, in a sense, their own weapon, in a sense, like they are being or weaponized because there is to my mind, misreading and misusing of history, depending on what one's lens is. And so not only is there no coming to any kind of agreement on facts, on timeline, and maybe weaponizing is too strong a word, but everyone gets dug in this kind of historical summary that they've signed on to, whether or not they've actually studied it or taken the time to kind of kick the tires on it. So I guess I would ask you, Jenna, just, is that something that you're thinking about as a Jewish leader, of how do we have kind of a conversation that allows people to really have their narratives and not deny them their narratives, but also say that you're actually skipping over a pretty important thing that happened in 1937, whatever it was. You need to know about the partition plan, or you need to know about Oslo. There have to be sort of moments where the Hamas PA conflict, do you understand that? Like, it feels like that leaving those things for everybody's narrative is hurting, not helping.
I think that's right. I also just, I want, in this moment, I think there's a lot of focus right now on the students in the extremes, but the majority of people live in the middle, in the 80%, not because they don't care, but again, because they haven't asked or they don't know. And I think we do our best work when we give them the opportunity to start asking without requiring them to be able to go through the last 100 years of history in the Middle East. Before October 7th, one of the things I would always say is like, don't talk to me about facts before you know what my name is, right? Before you know where I'm from. What are the things that keep me up at night? We're not even doing that work well yet. We've got to start there. And I really, if as leaders, if we can say anything to our students in this moment, it's got to be, when you show up, you need to know that you can say what you want to say freely, but you have to be humble and kind. And that that it's important to say what you believe in, but you can't hurt somebody while you're doing that. Like, those are the things I really, more than the facts, we've got to get there first.
Uri, in terms of what it means to be a public Jew right now on campus, can you address that anxiety for some students and for some parents of students who might be thinking, maybe not the Jewish star, maybe not the kippah, maybe don't actually go sit in a sukkah? I mean, obviously we're past Sukkot, but don't do the public things for now. That would be depressing, but is that something you understand? How would you address it?
I would understand it. I'm not really hearing it, though. I'm not hearing too much concern. I mean, there are students who wonder whether they should wear their kippah out, but by and large, they do. And I actually was talking to a student last week who doesn't usually wear a kippah, who's right now doing it for sure, because he wants to be out there with it. I think the concern is much more about the general sense of safety and vulnerability as a Jew. I'm not actually sure how much it's amplified by public shows. On the other hand, I'm a public Jew on campus also, and I talk to administrators regularly. And I was at a gathering yesterday, a farewell for somebody who's been at Yale a long time, and I can't even count the number of colleagues at Yale who came up to me and said, "How are you doing? How's your community? We're praying for you. We're thinking of you. This must be so hard. And even thank you so much for all you're doing for our students and for Yale in general." And so that feels really good to be a public Jew and to have people be able to say, "We don't understand everything you're going through, but we know that it's really, really hard. And thank you for everything. And I hope you're okay." Right. That's heartening.
So I want to do a final round and start with you, Michael. You can interrupt me.
I mean,
what else is new?
What else is new? Thanks. But I was polite with Jenna and Uri. So I want to add one sort of wrinkle to that, which is, Uri mentioned earlier, and I want to kind of echo, at all. I mean, I've been around for a while, and I'm thinking back to, it was just the 5-year anniversary of the horrific Tree of Life massacre. And in that moment, our Hillels, we reached out to, or they reached out to us, the police, the security folks, to kind of make sure things were okay. And, and ever since then, or even before then, and certainly now, I mean, our security people on campus and here in Evanston have been, really not only responsive, but sometimes they've reached out. And that's given a sense of security and a sense of feeling that they're looking out for our well-being. In advance of this conversation, I reached out to students. I don't want to just come out here and tell you, here's what students are saying. I reached out last night and asked them, what are you feeling on campus? And one of the things that struck me, because the general feeling is, day to day, it's calm, it's relatively quiet. I got a lot of feedback about social media and the things that we've already talked about. A couple of students wrote, I have felt a concern because of there's an increased, I'm noticing a little more extra patrols. And so it doesn't make me feel, it's interesting. I'm glad they're there. And it also has me worried, because they have to be there. And I mean, that's always the push-pull of security, welcoming, living in an open society, but it's painful. It doesn't mean we're going to take any fewer measures, but it's also to keep in mind that that's having an impact too.
So I am going to continue with you here, Michael, and just ask you, as we are getting out of time, but I always hate the what makes you hopeful, and also what are you worried about? But I think this is a good time for those two questions. And you can take them in whatever order you want to. What makes you hopeful, and what actually is keeping you up at night?
Look, what it keeps me up at night is that we don't know where this is headed, and it is, we're all used to having, it's not fun, but the occasional crisis, and then we figure out and we get back to whatever a normal or a new normal is. And here it is, there are ongoing waves, and so we don't know where this is headed. And I'm always worried that about the well-being, security, and safety of my students, my colleagues, my campus, my community. That's what I'm worried about. And I'm worried about what's happening in Israel and in Gaza. What I'm hopeful about. I mean, Uri touched on it in terms of. I wish we'd been hearing from more allies and more, but we've heard from allies and we've heard from friends. I think the other thing is just seeing the incredible students that we have who have come together to figure out ways not only to grieve and mourn and not only to show pride, but to try to figure out a way to help build community, to begin asking, what does come next, and to think through and to be, really positive in the face of what I see as a really challenging moment. And I'm so proud. I mean, you asked at the very beginning, it's on the job description. This has been the most exhausting few weeks that I can remember in many years. And also it's every time I'm feeling completely drained, I get filled up again by the students, by the people that I get a chance to work with.
Thank you. Jenna?
There's so much to be hopeful about. I can't end without saying thank you to our administration. We were closed on the Monday after, but Tuesday morning, I was there at 8 a.m. and so was the entire administration. Every member of the administration showed up to sit down and just say, how are you doing and what do you need? Tell me about what students are saying. It was really incredible. It's tearing up. They have checked in every single day for 3 weeks. There is a lot of care, and I think that there's challenges there, but I'm incredibly grateful for that. Students, we are seeing so many of them, and I think a lot are walking through the door and they don't know why. And sort of learning how to validate that that's okay, that you don't really know why you decided at this moment to step through the Jewish doorway. But that leaves me hopeful that there's still, even folks that would never think Jewish space was the right space for them, feel right now that it is. 2 weeks ago, we did a Breaking Bread, Building Bonds dinner, an interfaith dinner. Max capacity. There were 50 people in the room that can only hold 50 people. Of all different faith backgrounds. The room looked like Queens. That's what makes me scared, right? Our space is going to not look like the borough anymore. People know I'm an evangelist for Queens. I think there's something incredible about this county. And the second that it doesn't look like itself is what would make me scared. But right, that room looked like Queens. Our Jewish students just want to help each other and be in community. That leaves me hopeful. What keeps me up at night is I think also the unknown. We just don't know where we are in this moment. It feels, in a game of baseball, we're on maybe first base. I have no sense of what second and third look like. And I think that's just sort of driving anxiety now for everyone.
Thank you. And Uri, the final word.
So what keeps me up at night is that it seems like the present way that universities are set up and the way the dynamics are, they're waiting for someone to get attacked to do something. There are lines that they will not cross until someone gets attacked. And if that's the best we can do, that's horrible. I'm not the only one who feels that way at Yale, and I'm sure my colleagues would agree. But that's a really scary reality, that the universities are so unable to do anything until it's too late. And what's the too late going to be, and how many people, and who's it going to be? That's the part that keeps me up at night. The thing that gives me hope is that I know all my colleagues here on this call, every professional who works at any Hillel anywhere are motivated by the same thing, which is the future must be better than the present. It must be. And that's why we get up every day, because the number one thing that Jews do is go to college. And that's going to be the case long into the future, long after this, on all of these schools, as unpleasant as it may be right now. They're going to be students in these places for a long time. And so now that we've learned what the universities are capable of, and more importantly, are not capable of, the focus on Hillel's as the place that students can go, the entity on campus that can and will always be there to support students where the universities will come up short, has never been more prevalent, has never been more obvious, and needs to be more obvious in the conversation in the Jewish community going forward, because we are the key to the future being better than the present.
Uri Cohen, Michael Simon, Jenna Citron Schwab, I am so grateful to the three of you, not just for today, but for the work you do every day. And I mean that so sincerely. You are on the front lines in the way that makes me exhale when I have been holding my breath. So thank you. Thank you for being part of this. And to all of you who listened, I'm Abigail Pogrebin for In the Spotlight. I'll see you next time.